Fat Girl Freestyle here with another creepy and true tale from my life. I used to work at a group home in mid-city of New Orleans. And this group home was for differently abled men. They were wards of the state. Some of them were low functioning. Some of them were medium to high functioning. Some of them were able to communicate verbally and some of them weren't. I worked there for a brief period of time, and you will understand why when I tell you about this experience. This home was a former funeral home. They would prepare the bodies downstairs and bring them upstairs on a lift that would open up on the porch so that they could roll the coffins into one of the rooms to have the services. The pulley with the chain was still downstairs. They'd never taken it down. And the lift still worked on the porch. So if you pulled the chain, the platform would go up and the doors would open on the porch. Well, this particular experience, a resident named Daniel, it's very sweet, very chatty, always wanted to tell me about what he did at his day program, what he learned, who he saw, what he ate for lunch. Every time I was at work, Daniel would come and find me when they got home. I mainly worked the 3 to 11 shift. One night, I'm putting Daniel to bed. And I'm making sure he has everything in order for him to go to his day program the next day. And he says, Miss Kim, Teddy wants the big light on because he doesn't want to be in the dark. I said, Daniel, I can't leave the big light on. I said, but I can turn the lamp on or I can leave the closet light on, but I can't leave the big light on. I said, you're not going to be able to sleep. He said, but Teddy wants the big light on, Miss Kim. I said, Daniel, I said, I can't leave the big light on. I said, it's either the lamp or the closet. Because if I leave the big light on, I'm going to get in trouble. I said, do you want me to get in trouble? He said, no, Miss Kim. He said, let me talk to Teddy. So he looks towards the corner by his bed and he's having a very serious conversation, facial expressions and all. And he turns and he looks at me because I'm standing in the door waiting for him to make his decision. And he says, Miss Kim, you can turn the lamp on. I said, okay, Daniel. I said, tell Teddy thank you for cooperating. I turn the lamp on, turn the big light off. I leave. Go about my duties. Talking to my coworker, we're doing laundry, doing different things. The next day, same routine. Get Daniel into bed, get him into his room, make sure his stuff is in order. And he tells me the same thing, Miss Kim. Teddy doesn't want the light off because he doesn't like being in the dark. I said, Daniel, I can't. I said, we're going to leave the lamp on like we did last night. Or we can do the closet. The closet light can certainly be on. He said, let me talk to Teddy. So again, he looks in that corner and he gets that serious look on his face. He's deep in conversation, very serious conversation. And he turns to me and he says, Miss Kim, Teddy said the lamp is fine. Turn the lamp on. Tell Daniel good night. I say, Daniel, tell Teddy, I said thank you for his cooperation. Go back out, talk to my coworker. Same routine. Third night, same thing. Daniel, I can't leave the big light on. He said, Miss Kim, Teddy says he wants the big light on. Don't turn it off. I said, Daniel, just talk to him and explain to him. He said, no, Miss Kim, Teddy's not very happy today. I said, Daniel, I'm going to turn the big light off and I'm going to turn the lamp on. I said, you and Teddy get a good night's sleep and we'll talk about it tomorrow. So I reached to turn the lamp on. And when I tell you, as soon as I reached for that lamp flew against the wall. And Daniel, who didn't budge, didn't jump, nothing, looks at me and says, Miss Kim, I told you Teddy wanted the big light on. He didn't want the lamp on. I said, okay, no problem. And I closed the door and I went straight to my coworker and I said, Carol, what's up? She said, what do you mean? And I told her about the 2 previous nights. I told her about Daniel talking to Teddy. And I told her what happened with the lamp. I said, Carol, I'm not crazy. I said, that fucking lamp flew off that dresser. I said, I didn't even touch it. I said, I got the fudge out of that room. I said, what's going on? I said, you need to level with me. She said, Kim, Daniel always talks to Teddy. She said, Teddy is a ghost. She said, I know it sounds strange. I said, no, ma'am. I said, nothing as strange as the way that lamp just flew off that dresser. I said, I didn't even pick it up. I said, I didn't even turn off the light. I said, I walked out of that room and I closed the door. I said, I'm not even going back in there. She said, well, prepare yourself. Because that's not it. And at this point, I'm wrestling between, do I want to keep this job because I have bills and I have children? Or am I going to walk the fudge out? So her and I are sitting in the dining area, chatting, just talking, and she's trying to calm me down. And me, I don't want to alarm the residents. I don't want to flip out and act crazy. I don't want to alarm the residents. But I'm like, I'm not going back in that room. So we're talking and she's trying to keep me calm. And Daniel comes out of his room and he says to me, he says, Miss Kim, Teddy doesn't like you very much. He doesn't want you here anymore. I said, no problem. I'm out of here. I grabbed my purse I told Carol, I said, I'm gone. She said, Kim, don't leave. She was like, wait. I said, no, Carol. I said, listen. I said, this is some creepy ass shit. I said, listen, I was willing to accept the fact that this place used to be a funeral home. I said, but I'm not into all of this otherworldly, paranormal, strange happenings. I said, this is not my thing. Because at the time, I wasn't into it, y'all. I wasn't aware. I didn't know. Still young at the time. My kids were young. I needed to work, but I didn't need to work that bad to where I was going to open myself up to these experiences. And especially not with Daniel coming to tell me that Teddy didn't like me and didn't want me there. Some kind of way, I stayed that night. I finished my shift. I called my boss the next day and I talked to her. I let her convince me to come back. Why did I do that? Downstairs one evening, doing the laundry. Everything had been calm for about a week. This is about a week after the lamp incident. And me convincing myself, oh, maybe I don't know, touched it and it just kind of tilted over and hit the wall. The things we tell ourselves when we're in a state of denial. Well, I was about to be in denial no more. I'm downstairs doing laundry. And there was a back stairway. That's the stairway we used to use because it was closest to the laundry room. So I have a basket full of clothes folded for the residents upstairs. I'm walking up, holding the basket, watching my steps. I get to the landing, which is halfway between the set of bottom stairs and the set of top stairs. I get to the landing, and at the top, there's a little boy, little Caucasian boy, maybe 10 years old, just as real as I am right now, in front of me at the top of those stairs by the door. He's got on a brown page boy button-down shirt, plaid pants, brown socks, black shoes. See him as clear as day. And I'm just standing there holding this basket for dear life, trembling. Because those are old-timey clothes from, I don't know, 20s, 30s. I knew he wasn't really real, but I was seeing him. I was looking at him with my eyes, just as real as I am right here. I'm looking at him with my eyes. And he's looking at me. I knew he wasn't real. He smiled. Just like that. And he turned and he went out the door and around the corner. And I'm still standing here trembling, holding the basket just. And my coworker finally comes. She says, Kim, I've been calling you for the last 5 minutes. I said, I quit. She said, what happened? I said, little boy, the little boy. I said, you didn't see him? I said, please tell me I'm not crazy and you saw that little boy run up that hallway. I said, he went through the door and turned. I said, please tell me you brought a kid with you or somebody's kid is here. I said, please tell me. She said, Kim, come upstairs. She said, let me talk to you. I said, I'm not staying in this house. I said, I have to go and I'm not coming back. She said, just let me explain. So I put the basket down and I, of course, grabbed my purse, my bag, my keys. And she's like, let me explain. She said, listen. She said, I've seen the little boy you're talking about. Quite a few of us have seen him. She said, he is the funeral director that used to own this place. Teddy was his son. And Teddy died in an accident. They never quite figured out what happened. And of course, he was prepared here. His services were here. She said, and he lingers here. She said, and he has attached himself to Daniel for whatever reason. Daniel's always talking about him. He's always in Daniel's room. Like he's really attached himself to Daniel. She said, but he's never harmed anybody. She said, weird things will happen. She said, we'll catch glimpses of him sometimes. She said, sometimes we'll see him, we'll see him completely. And she asked me what he had on, and I described. I said he had the page boy button-down shirt, plaid pants, brown socks, dark shoes. She said, yeah, he's in the same thing every time. She said, but I promise you, he's harmless. She said, it's just one of those things. I said, not to me. I said, you didn't see that smirk on his face. I said, it gave me the chills. I said, I'm not staying here. I said, I have to go. I said, whatever paperwork I have to fill out, I said, give it to me. I'm going to take it with me. So I gathered my things off the table. I go to walk out the door. She's right behind me. And I kid you not, the lift that they used to use to put the caskets on, to bring them upstairs to the porch, to roll into the house, to put in one of the parlors, the lift was up and open on the porch when I opened the door to leave out. I don't know how I got out the door. I don't know how I got past the lift, but I shot down those stairs, hopped in my car, and I never went back. And they called and called and called and called and called me. And I never answered. They owed me a check and everything, and I never even bothered to go and pick it up. House is still there, of course. Pretty sure it's still a group home. I hope whoever is working there, I hope Teddy likes them hell of a lot better than he liked me. This has been Fat Girl Freestyle, and as always, I love you.